It was one of those long summer afternoons when the air felt heavy and the sun pressed down on the city streets. The sidewalks shimmered, children carried ice creams that melted too quickly, and people walked slower than usual, fanning themselves with newspapers or paper bags. Life seemed to move at half speed, but for Officer Daniel, it was just another routine shift. He had been on the force for many years, and on that day he drove his patrol car slowly down the neighborhood streets, scanning left and right out of habit. Daniel was known by many in the area. Some saw him as strict, others whispered about his temper. For reasons even he couldn't fully explain, he often paid more attention to certain people than others. His fellow officers sometimes looked the other way, and the community often sighed in frustration when his name came up. That day, he wasn't looking for anything big, just passing time, waiting for the hours to pass until his shift ended. At the very same time, a young girl named Aaliyah was walking home from the library. She was only 14, a bright teenager who loved reading stories more than anything else. Books were her escape, adventures, mysteries, tales about people who faced struggles and found their strength. Her backpack was heavy with borrowed books, and she held them close to her chest as she walked along the sidewalk. Aaliyah's mother always reminded her to come straight home, especially on hot days like this, when the heat could make anyone feel dizzy. But Aaliyah wasn't worried. She was thinking about the novel she had just picked up, one she couldn't wait to start reading as soon as she reached her room. She imagined herself curling up by the fan, losing track of time in the pages of another world. It was then, as she crossed a quiet street, that the sound of the police car grew louder. The patrol car slowed down beside her. She turned her head and saw Officer Daniel watching her through the open window. For a moment, she felt nervous, not because she had done anything wrong, but because his stare felt sharp, as if he was searching for a reason to stop her. "Hey, you there," Daniel called out, his voice firm. Aaliyah stopped walking. She tightened her grip on her books and looked at him with wide eyes. "Yes, sir," she said softly, unsure of why he had called out to her. Daniel stepped out of the car. The door shut behind him with a heavy thud. He looked at her backpack and then back at her face. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm just going home from the library," Aaliyah replied. Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to sound confident. She pointed at the books in her arms. "These are from there." Something about her answer didn't seem to matter to him. Perhaps it was the heat, perhaps it was the way his mind worked that day, or perhaps it was the prejudice he carried deep inside. Instead of simply nodding and letting her go, Daniel's thoughts began to twist. He asked her more questions: where she lived, what she was carrying, why she was walking alone. Each answer she gave was honest, but instead of easing his suspicion, he seemed more set on proving something to himself. Within minutes, Aaliyah found herself standing nervously as he told her to put her books in the back seat of the patrol car. She hesitated, confused, not understanding why she was being treated this way. "But I didn't do anything," she whispered. Daniel didn't explain. He simply opened the back door of the patrol car and told her to get in. The back of the car was cramped, with its hard seats and locked doors that couldn't be opened from the inside. Aaliyah looked around, her heart beating fast. She wanted to call her mother, but she didn't have her phone with her. She only had her books, sitting quietly on the seat beside her. As the door closed, she heard the click of the lock. She sat in silence, the sun shining through the window, heating the inside of the car. Time seemed to slow down. Outside, Daniel walked around the car as if nothing unusual had happened. To him, it was just another stop, just another moment in his long shift. But what he didn't know, and what Aaliyah couldn't have imagined, was that something strange was happening inside his own mind. Earlier that week, he had complained of headaches and moments of forgetfulness. His doctor had warned him to get checked, but Daniel shrugged it off. That day, under the heavy summer sun, his mind grew foggy. He paused for a second, staring at the front of his car, trying to remember what he had just been doing. For a man who prided himself on control and authority, the sudden blankness in his mind was unsettling. He shook his head, climbed into the driver's seat, and began writing something in his notebook. But as the minutes ticked by, the haze in his thoughts thickened. He grew distracted, flipping pages, then stepping out again to talk to a neighbor. Slowly, almost unbelievably, he began to forget about the young girl locked inside the car. Aaliyah sat in the back seat, hugging her knees. She tried the handle again and again, but it wouldn't budge. Her eyes filled with tears, though she tried to stay calm. She thought about her mother, who would be wondering why she was late. She thought about the library, about the safe walls and shelves filled with books. Most of all, she thought about how unfair it all felt to be treated like this for no reason at all. The minutes stretched into longer silence. The heat inside the car grew heavier. Aaliyah's forehead pressed against the window, hoping for a breeze. Every sound outside, footsteps, voices, the distant hum of traffic, gave her hope that someone might notice her. But no one looked inside. Meanwhile, Daniel walked further away, stopping to chat with another officer down the block. His face looked calm, but inside his head, he was struggling to piece together his thoughts. He rubbed his temples, feeling the confusion swirl. Something important tugged at the edge of his memory, but he couldn't quite catch it. He didn't realize that the important thing was sitting only a few steps away, locked in his car, growing weaker in the stifling heat. The neighborhood, as ordinary as it seemed, was holding its breath. A story was unfolding, one that would later leave people shocked, angry, and asking hard questions about responsibility, prejudice, and the fragile line between life and tragedy. But for now, the summer sun kept burning, and Aaliyah sat quietly in the patrol car, not knowing how long she would be there, and not knowing that the man who had put her there was slowly forgetting she even existed. The car sat parked on the side of the street, its metal roof absorbing the sunlight, turning the inside into a small oven. The windows let in brightness but not air, and Aaliyah pressed her palms against the glass, wishing someone would notice her. Her throat felt dry, and she could feel sweat rolling down her back. She tried to stay calm, telling herself that maybe it wouldn't be long. Maybe the officer would come back and explain it was just a mistake. But minutes stretched into longer minutes, and each one felt heavier than the last. She shifted on the hard seat, hugging her backpack close. The books inside were comforting, even though they couldn't help her. She thought about her favorite story, the one where the main character faced impossible odds and still found a way to survive. Aaliyah whispered quietly to herself, repeating the words she remembered from that story. It made her feel a little less alone. Outside, the street looked normal. A few people walked by, carrying groceries, chatting, or heading home from work. None of them noticed the girl inside the patrol car. To them, it looked like any other official vehicle parked in the neighborhood. No one thought to check. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel leaned against a fence at the corner, trying to keep his thoughts straight. His head felt clouded, like a thick fog had moved in and refused to lift. He rubbed his forehead and looked around, struggling to remember why he had stopped there in the first place. He told himself it was nothing important, just a routine pause. He convinced himself that he could keep moving, keep patrolling, without realizing that a young life depended on his memory. A neighbor named Mrs. Turner came out of her front porch, fanning herself with a folded piece of paper. She saw Daniel standing there and waved. "Hot day, isn't it?" she called. Daniel nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yes, very hot," he replied, his voice a little distant. Mrs. Turner tilted her head. "You all right, officer? You look pale." He gave a short laugh, pretending everything was fine. "Just tired," he said, avoiding her eyes. Deep down, he knew something wasn't right with him. His mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be. He often forgot names, misplaced things, and now, in the middle of his shift, he felt like pieces of his memory were slipping away like water through his fingers. As he spoke with her, the minutes ticked by. Aaliyah remained trapped in the car, her face pressed against the hot window, her breathing shallow. She wished she could knock hard enough for someone to hear, but the heavy doors and the busy street swallowed her faint attempts. She thought of her mother again. By now, her mom would be wondering why she hadn't come home. Dinner was probably being prepared, and the table would soon be set. Aaliyah's place at the table would be empty, and her mother would glance at the clock, worry growing with each passing minute. The fear inside Aaliyah grew, but so did her determination. She whispered to herself, "I'll be okay. Someone will see me. Someone will help." Back at the corner, Daniel's fellow officer, Mark, pulled up in another patrol car. He rolled down the window and called out, "Hey, Daniel. You good?" Daniel turned, startled. For a moment, he struggled to remember his colleague's name, though they had worked together for years. Yeah, I'm fine," Daniel said quickly, though his voice didn't sound convincing. Mark narrowed his eyes. "You sure? You look out of it. Need me to cover for you?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I'm fine. Just a bit of heat getting to me." Mark shrugged and drove off, trusting his partner's word. He had no idea what was really happening, no idea that Daniel had forgotten about the girl sitting helplessly in the back of his car. Inside the car, Aaliyah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to rest. But the heat made it impossible. Her skin felt sticky, her head heavy. She prayed silently for someone to notice, for the door to open, for the air to rush in and free her from the suffocating space. Time moved strangely. For Aaliyah, every second felt like an hour. For Daniel, the hours blurred together in confusion. His notebook lay open in the front seat of the patrol car, the last line written half-finished, as if he had forgotten mid-sentence what he meant to write. Aaliyah tried again to push the door handle, knowing it wouldn't work, but still hoping something had changed. She knocked gently on the window, then louder, though her strength was fading. A man passed by walking his dog, but he didn't glance inside. The patrol car looked official and unremarkable. To him, it was just another piece of the city landscape. The sun dipped lower, but the heat inside the car didn't let up. Aaliyah felt her heart race faster, her breathing uneven. She leaned her head back and whispered softly, "Please, someone see me." Back at the corner, Daniel wiped his face with his handkerchief. He tried to recall what his day had been so far, but the memory slipped away like smoke. He felt an ache in his chest, not from his heart, but from the uneasiness of not knowing what he had forgotten. He told himself it was small, nothing important. But deep down, he knew that something was wrong, something urgent. As evening crept in, the world outside continued on as usual. Families gathered for dinner, children played in sprinklers, and the city kept moving. Yet, inside that locked patrol car, a young girl's hope and strength were being tested in ways she had never imagined. And still, the one person who could have freed her walked aimlessly, lost in his own fading memory, unaware of the silent struggle only a few feet away. The day that had begun like any other was slowly turning into something far more serious, a story that would not be forgotten, even if the man at the center of it had already forgotten too much. The sky slowly shifted colors as the afternoon slid toward evening. The bright blue began to soften into shades of orange and pink, yet the heat in the air still lingered, especially inside the locked patrol car. For Aaliyah, the hours felt endless. The warm air pressed against her like a heavy blanket, and every breath seemed harder than the last. She leaned her head against the seat, her eyelids heavy, but she kept fighting to stay awake. She knew she couldn't let herself drift off. "Stay strong," she whispered softly. Her voice was faint, almost like she was talking to herself in a dream. Her thoughts kept circling back to her mom. By now, she imagined her mother pacing in the kitchen, calling her name, checking the clock again and again. Maybe she had already phoned a neighbor or even the library to ask if they had seen her daughter. The image of her mom's worried face gave Aaliyah a spark of strength. She told herself she had to hold on. Her mom was waiting for her, and she couldn't give up. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel stood just a block away, his mind spinning in fog. He tried to think about his day, about what he had done so far, but the details slipped away. He rubbed the back of his neck, muttering under his breath, "What was I doing again?" His notebook was still sitting in the front of the patrol car, but he hadn't looked at it for hours. A neighbor passing by greeted him casually. "Evening, officer." "Staying busy?" Daniel gave a half smile, though his eyes looked distant. "Yeah, just out here." But inside, he felt uneasy. A nagging voice whispered that he had forgotten something important. It made his stomach twist, but every time he tried to focus, his thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. Back in the car, Aaliyah shifted uncomfortably, the heat pressing down harder with every passing minute. Her small backpack was now just a cushion for her aching arms. The books inside, the ones she had been so excited to read, were now heavy reminders of the day's unfairness. She looked at their colorful covers and thought about the characters inside. She remembered how those characters always found courage, even when the world seemed against them. That memory gave her a little spark of hope. She pressed her palm against the window again. Outside, the world carried on. People strolled past, not realizing a young girl was sitting just a few feet away, silently begging for someone to notice. A group of kids rode bicycles, laughing and shouting. Aaliyah wanted to shout too, but her throat was dry, and her voice weak. She tapped lightly on the glass, hoping the sound might catch someone's ear. But no one looked her way. The sun dipped lower, and the orange light made everything glow. The car's metal body trapped the last of the heat like an oven. Aaliyah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling dizzy, but quickly opened them again. She told herself she couldn't give in. "Just a little longer," she whispered. At the corner, Daniel pulled out his phone, staring at the screen as if the numbers and names would remind him of something. He scrolled without focus, his mind blank. Then suddenly, a sharp pain hit his temple. He pressed his hand against his head and leaned against the fence, breathing heavily. His vision blurred for a few seconds, and then cleared again. He shook his head, muttering, "Get it together." But instead of remembering, he sank deeper into confusion. His condition, which he had ignored for weeks, was now controlling him completely. He couldn't place the feeling, but it was as if pieces of his memory had been erased. And among those erased pieces was the most urgent truth, that he had left a young girl locked in his patrol car. Aaliyah's strength was fading. She thought of water, cool, refreshing water, and how badly she wanted just one sip. She imagined the sound of her mom pouring juice into a glass, the ice clinking. She closed her eyes and pictured it so clearly that for a moment, she almost felt comfort. But the heat quickly reminded her of where she was. Her hands felt heavy, her breathing shallow. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against the seat in front of her. "Please, someone," she whispered again. Her words barely filled the space around her. Down the street, Mrs. Turner, the same neighbor who had spoken to Daniel earlier, came back outside to water her plants. She glanced at the patrol car but didn't think much of it. Police cars often stopped in the neighborhood. But as she carried her watering can closer, she thought she saw something, a faint movement inside. She paused, squinting. Was someone sitting in the back seat? Her watering can tipped slightly, spilling water onto the sidewalk, but she didn't notice. She leaned forward, trying to get a better look. For a brief second, she thought she saw the outline of a young face pressed against the window. But the sun's glare made it hard to be sure. She shook her head. "Probably just my eyes playing tricks," she murmured. She turned back toward her garden, never realizing how close she was to discovering the truth. Inside the car, Aaliyah lifted her hand weakly, pressing it against the window again. She saw the shadow of Mrs. Turner for a moment and thought, maybe she'll see me. But when the woman walked away, the little hope inside Aaliyah dimmed. The evening breeze finally cooled the outside air, but inside the locked car, the heat remained trapped. The glass held it in, and the air grew stuffy and stale. Aaliyah's breaths came shorter now. Her vision blurred at the edges. She whispered once more, but the sound was almost gone. At the corner, Daniel suddenly felt a chill run through him. He couldn't explain why, but his heart raced for no reason. A feeling almost like guilt tugged at him, though he couldn't name what it was about. He looked back toward his car but quickly looked away, convincing himself it was fine. He turned down the street, pacing slowly, lost in his haze. The patrol car sat quietly, blending into the neighborhood like any other parked vehicle. Yet inside, a silent struggle for survival continued. The day had started like any other, but by this point, it had turned into something far greater, a test of endurance for a young girl, and a test of conscience for a man who no longer knew his own mind. This was the moment where everything balanced on the edge. A single discovery could change everything, but another hour of silence could take it too far. The turning point had come, though no one yet realized how serious the story had become. The evening shadows grew longer, stretching across the quiet neighborhood. The golden light of the setting sun faded slowly into soft gray, and the streets grew cooler. But inside the patrol car, the heat was still trapped, pressing down on Aaliyah like a heavy blanket that would not lift. Aaliyah tried to shift her position, but the seat belt was tight across her chest, pinning her in place. Her legs felt stiff, and every movement seemed to require more effort than she had left. She pressed her forehead against the back of the seat and closed her eyes for a moment, listening. Outside, she could hear distant car engines, the faint laughter of children returning home, and the soft rustling of leaves in the trees. But none of it was close enough to help her. Time had become meaningless. Minutes stretched like hours, and hours felt like days. Aaliyah focused on her breathing, taking slow, shallow breaths to calm herself. She imagined a cool stream of water running over her hands, a gentle breeze brushing her face, and the sound of her mom calling her name. That image gave her a small spark of hope, a tiny flame she refused to let die. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel had finally stopped pacing. He leaned against a street lamp, feeling the rough texture of the metal against his back. Something inside him was tugging, a feeling he couldn't place. It was as if a small alarm bell was ringing in his mind, warning him that something important had gone wrong. But he couldn't remember what. His head throbbed, and his chest felt tight. He glanced back toward the patrol car again. The vehicle seemed ordinary from the outside, but he felt an uneasy pull in his gut. A shadow of memory flickered in his mind, a faint image of the girl inside, her small hand against the glass. But the thought vanished almost immediately, like smoke in the wind. He shook his head and muttered, "No, nothing. Just my imagination." Back in the car, Aaliyah's situation was becoming more serious. Her vision blurred at the edges, and her mouth felt dry. She pressed her hand against the window again, tapping lightly in case someone was passing by. The sound was soft, but it was the only way she could try to call attention. Suddenly, a soft voice broke through the quiet, "Is someone in there?" Aaliyah's heart leaped. She turned her head toward the sound, her eyes widening. Through the faint glow of the streetlights, she saw a figure approaching. It was Mrs. Turner, the neighbor who had watered her plants earlier. She was carrying a flashlight, and the beam danced across the patrol car. "Hello? Are you okay?" Mrs. Turner called out, her voice gentle but firm. Aaliyah lifted her hand weakly, pressing it against the glass once more. "Help, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Turner's eyes widened as she realized the girl was inside the locked car. "Oh my goodness," she gasped. She ran toward the back of the vehicle, fumbling with the doors, but the lock was secure. Her hands trembled as she tried to stay calm. "Stay with me, sweetie. I'm going to get you out," she said. Meanwhile, Daniel's foggy mind began to clear slightly as he heard the voice. He turned sharply, blinking at the scene. The realization hit him like a sudden splash of cold water. The girl. He had left her in the car. He ran back to the vehicle, heart racing, and fumbled with the keys. His hands shook as he tried to unlock the doors. Aaliyah's eyes filled with relief as the door clicked open. The moment it swung wide, a wave of cooler evening air rushed in, and she took a deep, gasping breath. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mrs. Turner bent down, helping Aaliyah step out carefully. "You're okay now," she said softly, guiding her to the sidewalk. Aaliyah leaned against her for support, finally feeling the strength return to her legs. The evening air felt like a blessing, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting it wash over her. Daniel stood nearby, pale and shaken. He watched the girl breathe freely for the first time in hours and felt a sharp pang of guilt. I didn't. I don't know what happened," he stammered, his voice cracking. The fog in his mind was slowly lifting, and with it came the full weight of his mistake. Aaliyah looked at him, her eyes still wide but no longer afraid. She could sense his confusion and knew he wasn't fully aware of what he had done. It's okay," she said softly, though her voice carried a quiet strength. She had survived the ordeal, and now she wanted to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on anger. Mrs. Turner helped Aaliyah sit on a nearby bench, offering her a bottle of water she had grabbed from her house. The girl drank slowly, savoring every drop. The cool liquid slid down her throat, and she felt a warmth of relief spread through her body. I thought I'd never get out," she admitted quietly, her voice shaky. Daniel stood a few feet away, watching. His hands were trembling, and he felt a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. The realization of what could have happened, of how close he had come to causing serious harm, made his stomach churn. He knew he needed to take responsibility, but his mind was still clouded. Mrs. Turner looked at him sharply. "You need to call for help. Now. And make sure this doesn't happen again," she said firmly. Her eyes were kind but unyielding, showing that she would not let anyone ignore the seriousness of the situation. Daniel nodded slowly, fumbling with his radio and phone. He reported the incident, giving the details he could remember. Backup arrived quickly, officers rushing to the scene to make sure Aaliyah was safe and to assess the situation. They were professional, calm, and careful, and their presence made everyone feel a little more secure. Aaliyah explained what had happened in simple words, recounting how she had been left alone in the patrol car and how the heat had made it hard to breathe. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions gently. They treated her with respect and concern, making sure she knew she was safe now. Daniel watched silently, overwhelmed by a mix of shame, guilt, and relief. He could see that Aaliyah was okay, that she had survived, and that the quick thinking of Mrs. Turner had saved her from serious danger. He realized how close things had come to tragedy and felt a deep sense of responsibility for his actions, even though his memory lapses had contributed. By the time the sun had fully set and the street lights glowed softly, Aaliyah was calm again, sitting on the bench with a blanket draped over her shoulders. Mrs. Turner stayed nearby, offering comfort and support. Daniel remained standing, watching from a distance, understanding that this moment would stay with him forever. The neighborhood, which had seemed ordinary just hours before, now felt different. It had been the scene of fear, confusion, and near danger. But it was also the place where courage, quick thinking, and kindness had come together to prevent harm. Aaliyah's resilience and Mrs. Turner's alertness had made all the difference. As night settled in, The officers began wrapping up their investigation. Daniel was asked to stay and provide more detailed statements once he felt capable. He nodded, still shaken but aware that he needed to face the consequences of his actions. He knew he could not ignore what had happened, no matter how foggy his memory had been. Aaliyah's parents arrived shortly afterward. Her mother ran forward, enveloping her daughter in a tight hug. "You're okay," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Aaliyah clung to her, feeling the warmth and safety she had longed for during the hours trapped in the car. Her father held her other side, his face pale with worry but filled with relief. "We thought we might lose you," he said softly. Aaliyah shook her head gently. "I'm okay now," she replied. She had survived. She had stayed strong. As the family walked away together, Mrs. Turner waved goodbye, a small smile on her face. She had done what she could, and it had been enough. Daniel remained behind, reflecting on the evening's events, knowing that he would carry the lesson with him always. The quiet of the neighborhood returned, but the story of the day lingered, a story of fear, resilience, kindness, and the sharp reminder of how quickly things can change when someone forgets their responsibility. The night air had grown calm, carrying a cool breeze through the streets where just hours before fear had dominated. Aaliyah sat on the bench with her parents beside her, their hands gripping hers tightly. Her mother's eyes were red from worry and tears, and her father's jaw was set as he tried to steady himself after the shock of nearly losing his daughter. The quiet street felt different now, almost peaceful, but the memory of what had happened lingered, heavy in the back of their minds. Aaliyah took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. For the first time in hours, she felt safe. The patrol car that had once been a cage now sat a few feet away, parked under the dim streetlight. She remembered how trapped she had felt, how the heat had pressed against her like a weight, how each second had felt endless. But she had survived. That thought gave her a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed before. Her mother leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from Aaliyah's forehead. "You were so brave," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I don't know how you stayed calm in there." Aaliyah shook her head gently. "I kept thinking. I just had to breathe. I had to wait for someone. I knew someone would notice." Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying the sense of a young girl who had faced danger and come through it. She felt proud of herself, but also aware of how serious the situation had been. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "And someone did notice," he said. "Mrs. Turner was looking out for you, and she saved you. You weren't alone." Aaliyah nodded, remembering the moment when Mrs. Turner's voice had called to her, cutting through the fear and confusion. That moment had been her lifeline. Meanwhile, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, curious and concerned. They had heard the commotion and wanted to make sure everyone was safe. Mrs. Turner stood nearby, explaining to anyone who would listen how she had realized something was wrong and acted quickly. People whispered among themselves, praising her quick thinking and courage. Officer Daniel stood apart from the crowd, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. His memory had been foggy earlier, and he had not realized the danger Aaliyah was in. Now, seeing her safe, he felt a mixture of relief, guilt, and determination. He knew that forgetting his responsibility could have had catastrophic consequences. He understood that he needed to face what had happened, take responsibility, and make sure it never happened again. The backup officers began their paperwork, carefully documenting every detail. They asked Daniel to recount what he could remember, and he did so honestly, admitting the lapses in his memory and his failure to check on Aaliyah. His voice was low and sincere. "I didn't realize. I wasn't thinking. I am so sorry," he said quietly. His words carried the weight of someone who had made a serious mistake and now had to confront it fully. Aaliyah's parents watched him, their expressions a mix of relief and cautious concern. They could see that he was shaken, but they also knew that apologies were only the first step. They would ensure that lessons were learned, that safety would be prioritized in the future, and that no other child would face the same danger. After the officers finished their work, Aaliyah's parents invited her inside their home to rest. She felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but also lighter now that she was safe. Her parents stayed close, making sure she drank water, rested, and had everything she needed. The warmth of the home, the familiar surroundings, and her family's care helped soothe the tension that had built up over the long afternoon. Aaliyah lay down on her bed, her eyes staring at the ceiling. She thought about the events of the day, the fear of being trapped, the heat, the isolation. But she also thought about courage, about Mrs. Turner's quick thinking, and about her own inner strength. She realized that even in scary situations, hope could exist. Even when people made mistakes, there were others who could act with care and responsibility to make things right. The next morning, the neighborhood seemed almost normal again, but there was a quiet sense of awareness among the people. Parents watched their children more closely, neighbors checked in on one another, and everyone remembered the girl in the patrol car. The incident had left an impression, a reminder that life could change in an instant and that vigilance, kindness, and quick thinking were valuable qualities in a community. Aaliyah returned to school the next day, holding her parents' hands tightly as she walked through the gates. Her friends ran to greet her, concerned but relieved to see her safe. She told them briefly what had happened, careful with her words, making sure the story conveyed both the danger and the relief that followed. Her friends listened, eyes wide, absorbing the seriousness of the events. But they also admired her bravery, the way she had remained calm, and the way she had trusted that help would come. At home, Aaliyah's parents contacted the local authorities to ensure that procedures would be reviewed. They spoke with supervisors about the incident, emphasizing that while Daniel's memory lapses had contributed, policies needed to protect children from similar situations in the future. They wanted to make sure that no other child would face the same risk, and that every officer would understand the importance of checking on the welfare of those in their care. Daniel, meanwhile, faced a period of reflection and accountability. He attended meetings with supervisors and counselors, discussing what had happened and how he could prevent such lapses in the future. The experience was humbling, but it also became a turning point. He learned the importance of focus, awareness, and responsibility, and he committed himself to being a better officer, someone who would never allow fear or forgetfulness to endanger another life again. In the weeks that followed, Aaliyah returned to her routine, but with a new sense of strength. She felt proud of herself, proud of how she had handled fear, and proud of the calmness she had maintained. She also felt grateful for Mrs. Turner, for her parents, for the neighbors who had cared, and even for the officers who had acted responsibly once the situation was realized. Her story spread through the neighborhood and the school, not as a tale of fear, but as one of courage, community, and vigilance. Teachers praised her composure, neighbors admired her bravery, and her parents reminded her that she had been an example of resilience and hope. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Aaliyah reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the heat, the loneliness, it all felt distant now, yet it had shaped her. She understood more deeply the value of staying calm in difficult situations, the importance of trusting others, and the way communities could come together to protect one another. Her parents joined her, wrapping an arm around each of her shoulders. "You've grown so much," her mother said. "This was a scary experience, but you faced it with courage." Aaliyah smiled softly. "I learned a lot," she admitted. "I learned that even when things seem hopeless, there's always a way through. And that people can make mistakes, but we can also fix them if we try." Her father nodded. "Exactly. And you showed everyone what it means to be brave, to stay calm, and to trust that help will come." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Aaliyah felt a sense of peace. The day she had been trapped in a patrol car, nearly harmed by heat and neglect, was behind her. What mattered now was the future, her safety, her growth, and the lessons learned. She knew that her experience had changed her, made her stronger, and reminded everyone around her of the power of courage, kindness, and vigilance. The neighborhood slowly returned to its regular rhythm. Children played in the streets under careful watch, neighbors exchanged smiles and greetings, and officers carried out their duties with renewed attention to safety. The incident had left its mark, but it had also sparked awareness and care. Aaliyah went to bed that night feeling secure, hugged tightly by her parents, surrounded by the warmth and love of family. She had survived something terrifying, but she had come through it with her spirit intact. Her story would remain a reminder to herself and to others. Even in the darkest moments, courage and hope could shine through, guiding the way to safety and resilience. And as the night deepened and the stars appeared in the sky, Aaliyah drifted to sleep, knowing she was safe, strong, and ready to face whatever came next.